I missed playing with these guys for the first year and a half. I was up there every Sabbath. They're working pretty much full-time with the youth church now, but these guys are my friends and my fellow musicians. You know, you heard a couple references in the tributes to receiving cards from Pat, from Mom. She didn't really want to have anything to do with this electronic nonsense that was going on in the world today, like emails and Facebook and stuff. She was very committed to the personal touch. I'm off script here, I'm just on myself. But she was committed to the personal touch of the phone call and the card. We probably will never have to buy another thank you or remembrance card for the rest of our lives. We'll try to stack about this high. She was always prepared. In the 8 days since Mom's death, our family has received messages of condolence, support, affirmation, and love from literally all over the world. I would venture to say it is accurate to put the number of these messages in the thousands. Particularly on Facebook, though many have been personally shared. Among the comments that have been made have been observations about the uncertainty of life, how life can change in an instant, the importance of living each day to the fullest, how we are not promised tomorrow, and so forth. Each one has been offered in a spirit of love, concern, and support, and I have no quarrel with these sentiments expressed, with the exception of one, which I will identify in a minute. Some days after following Mom's death, we were contacted by a much-loved family member in Arizona, Aunt Joanne. She was Mom's sister-in-law. She shared with us a conversation she had with Mom prior to her death. A conversation that went something like this, roughly paraphrased. Now, Joy, if you hear that something has happened to me, don't worry about me. I'm ready for what happens next. Whatever it is that God has in store for me. For us, this has been probably the most hopeful message that we have received. Because it says so much about the assurance Mom had in her relationship with Jesus. On the night Mom died, Marilee and I returned home from the hospital very late to a quiet, dark house that echoed loudly with the sound of emptiness. We made our way into Mom's apartment and sat in silence for a few moments. Then Marilee began to share with me how earlier that day, as she made her way to the car to go to work, she had passed through Mom's apartment, as was her custom for more than 20 years, to tell her how much she loved her and to tell her to have a wonderful day with Tom. She shared that Mom was already quietly engaged in her morning devotions. Blanket tucked around her legs for warmth, sitting in her favorite reading chair, no doubt eagerly anticipating the call from Terry she would receive that morning. The scene in the room that night was just as Mom had left it that morning. The blanket that had covered her legs was sitting piled up on her footstool. Sharing that footstool was her devotional book, placed face down and open, to save the spot where she would begin her devotions again the next morning. Marilee went over and picked it up, looked at it, and then said quietly, she was reading the book, The Story of Redemption. A book about the life of Jesus by one of her favorite authors. In that moment, having not yet received Joanne's message, we knew that Mom's story was not yet truly over. There is a story told by Jesus in Luke 15, which is familiar to every God follower. It is universally known as the parable of the prodigal son. And as I have struggled with my grief, I have been drawn back to this story. It is most often told from the perspective of the son, a young man who, having demanded that his father provide him with his inheritance early, has gone out in the world and squandered that inheritance, and then finds himself in desperate circumstances. Circumstances that are as low and demeaning as a young Jewish boy could ever imagine. It is a beautiful story of redemption, but I wonder if, over the centuries, that by focusing on the perspective of the son, we have failed to fully comprehend the significance of the role of the father. In the actions of the Father, I see a story of redemption that reveals the heart of God. And that, I think, was Jesus' probably most important reason for telling this story. Several months ago, the kids here at TAF studied this story with me, and when we did, we titled it The Story of the Waiting Father. Surrounded by the squalor of a pig pen, starving, longing really just for the chance to eat some of the food being fed to the pigs, the son comes to a decision. I'm going to read a couple verses. And kind of pick and choose parts. Starting in Luke 15, verse 18. I will set out and go back to my father. Verse 20. So he got up and he went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, the father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, Father, I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate. 4 verses that to me reveals the source of Mom's assurance in Jesus. Note that as the son makes his way back home, he does not have to open the farm gate, does not have to walk the long road past the vast field to the door of his father's house. No such effort is required, because while he was still a long way off, the father saw him. I hope you can understand the significance of this statement. Jesus in his story is teaching us about a God that mourns every fractured, absent relationship. A God whose yearning for relationships with us is so intense that he goes out every day and stands in the road at a place where he can see his returning children when they are still a long way off. A God who will allow no barrier to stand in the way of renewed relationship. Let's look again. While he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. And the son said, "Father, I am no longer worthy to be called your son." I can imagine as the son has made his way toward home, he has practiced this statement over and over in his mind, desperately searching for the words that would convince his father to take him back. It's interesting to me that the son has returned with no more expectation than to be accepted as a servant. And to be accepted back as a servant is now, for the son, an acceptable outcome. But the father reacts as if he hasn't even heard the words his son has spoken. The response of the father's heart is only love and compassion, demonstrated by a mad dash into his son's embrace, hugs, kisses. The power of a hug. Something Mom understood and practiced her whole life. And then finally, the final response: bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fatted calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead, and he's alive again. He was lost and he's found. And they begin to celebrate. The father covers his son with his best robes, covering the pig slime, the shame, the guilt, fully restoring him to the family. Celebration is the response of an ecstatic father, in relationship renewed, of love returned, of hugs and kisses. A father who has run towards his wayward child, not the other way around. This is the Jesus Mom knew. This is the Jesus who sustained her every day. This is the Jesus in whom her assurance was grounded. She had put on the robe that Jesus offered, the perfect robe that covered every failing and every weakness. This is the true story of redemption. It would be her deepest desire that this would be the redemption relationship and story of every person here today. I want to circle back to the beginning of my remarks, when I told you that all the messages of love and support we received over the last 8 days, that I take exception to only one. I included it in my list. And it's this: that we are not guaranteed tomorrow. In the book of John, we find the description of the final days of Jesus' life. For 3.5 years, he has been desperately trying to teach about a God that was vastly different from the God the religious leadership was imposing on the people. Their God was a God primarily of spirit-crushing rules and regulations, severe punishment, judgment, retribution. Jesus longed to reintroduce a God of relationship, of love renewed, a God who runs toward his children while they are still a long way off. The heart of Jesus, though in his human form, was still fully God, the God who runs toward his children. Even after years of close relationship, I don't think the disciples truly comprehended this mission yet, as it was entering its final chapter. Nonetheless, the heart of Jesus was making its final attempts to run toward his children. In John 14, he said, "Do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. My Father's house has many rooms. If that were not so, would I have told you that I am going there to prepare a place for you?" And then the great big heart of God said, "If I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am." The heart of Jesus, whose creative power exists for the purpose of establishing relationship, was promising his disciples and down through the centuries to us today, that tomorrow is guaranteed. Not only guaranteed, but eagerly anticipated by Jesus himself. I have a picture in my mind of Jesus for 2,000 years sitting impatiently on the edge of the seat of his throne in heaven, longing for the time he can return to this earth and end all this pain and heartache and death. Every heartache, every death, every tear is felt by the heart of Jesus more deeply than we can imagine. His joy will not be complete until he returns and ends this separation. This is the Jesus in whom Mom's assurance was grounded. I will end my thoughts this afternoon with this promise from the Bible that assures us that Mom's story is not yet complete and that a different tomorrow is guaranteed. In Psalms 30, weeping may stay for the night, but joy comes in the morning.